I'm going to show you a production trick that consistently works every single time I use it, and it's also a trick you'll find being used in pro productions literally all over the place. Now, it's not hard to do, but I can pretty much guarantee it's not something that you would expect. And make sure you watch all the way till the end, because I'm going to also fill you in on some mistakes to avoid too. It answers the question, how do I make my final chorus feel bigger? It's what everyone wants to know. It almost doesn't matter what genre you're in, so if you're producing pop, EDM, rock, indie, hip hop, etc., because the real secret is that it's actually not a mixing trick or even really a production trick. It's an arrangement trick. Here's the concept. If you have a song and you have a moment where you know you want it to be bigger in the end, that final chorus, for example, then you need to understand a very simple concept about how music works, and specifically arrangement and perception. If I play something really loud for you and then play another thing really loud for you and they're side by side, there won't be a lot of distinction even if the second thing I played was slightly louder. It's just not good enough. So when people say things like, just pump up your final chorus a couple dB, it usually doesn't actually work that well. And it usually in the end will actually end up squashed in mastering anyway, so it really doesn't quite work that way. And some mastering engineers will actually turn it down. So that's why this isn't a mixing trick. But if I play something that is soft first and then something that is loud, then guess what? You will perceive that second thing as much, much louder. Our brains are constantly listening to music through the lens of context. Context matters a lot. So if you have a song that's loud all the way through with no soft parts, no reprieve, then guess what? Listeners are not going to really be able to differentiate from a small from a big moment because you've not given them the context to do so. In other words, their perception isn't changed enough to make a big difference. But I'm also not saying that you have to have mega soft and mega loud sections in every single song to make this more abundant. Nope. This trick is in one sentence this: soft before loud equals big. It's a formula that I made up for it. So let me show you what I'm talking about and also show you some of the mistakes that people make when they try to do this. This is from my track Coming Back is gonna be the example, and this is the final chorus. Right on the final chorus, it sounds like this. So obviously, really loud, really dynamic, but right now, after me just playing it once for you, you don't have any context. You don't know the overall dynamic of the song, the arc of the songwriting, or anything. But now, let me show you what actually happens right before it in the bridge leading into that chorus.
Coming back home, I feel like I'm home.
So now you have some context. See, what I just did was showed you how having a relatively soft bridge before the loudest moment of the song actually just emphasized the dynamic shift in the song itself, therefore making it feel bigger. So even though if you were to compare the second chorus to this last chorus, there's not actually a massive dynamic change. But imagine if the bridge was dynamically at the same level leading into that last chorus. Do you think that it would have the same impact as what I actually ended up doing? No, there's not a chance. So when you are producing music, so often amateur producers try stuffing their final chorus with all the juice they can find to make it bigger. But unfortunately, there is only so much you can do before it sounds messy, muddy, like there's too much going on, and it doesn't make a big enough difference in the overall dynamic of that moment without it also potentially getting squashed in post-production. Adding more and more layers of bass and more guitars or more synths or keys won't do nearly as much to emphasize that final chorus as simply altering the dynamic of the arrangement leading up to the big moment. It's like when a movie gets dead quiet right before the huge moment where all the sound effects and music just comes down. And then all of a sudden it goes nuts and it's insanely dramatic. If the music and the sounds were to just kind of like keep going leading up to that, then it wouldn't have nearly as much impact. So it's similar in music with our productions. So let me show you another example and then a couple mistakes to avoid. This next example was my mashup of a Lauv and Billie Eilish track, and listen to the final chorus again without any context.
Lonely eyes, she had those lonely eyes. I only know 'cause I have them too.
Obviously, nice and loud, right? But now listen to what happens right before this moment.
Lonely eyes, she got those lonely eyes. I only know 'cause I have them too. Lonely eyes.
It's a huge difference because now you actually have the context to know that this is the moment. So when you are producing, find ways to bring the dynamic down before the biggest moment to give yourself a larger dynamic range difference to your listener. When you hear something come down in volume or dynamic, it makes that big moment feel so much more satisfying. So the very first mistake to avoid is not landing hard enough on the big moment. So if you have this dynamic drop and you amp it up in the last chorus, if you don't land on that moment, like on the downbeat of that moment, if you don't land on it hard enough, it's gonna feel stale and it's not gonna have that satisfaction. One of the big things that I do to help make sure that everything lands hard is a lot of times I'll add some sort of a cymbal, like a crash, or something to add a splash that has a longer tail that's gonna help basically with the transition, where the transition happens, which we're gonna talk about here in just a second. And once it hits on that downbeat, it kind of just goes like that. So cymbals can be really great. Mistake number 2 is not having the transition right. So if you have a really soft moment and then the transition into the loud moment doesn't actually fit, it's not gonna sound great. So again, in this last example and in the first example actually, you're gonna notice that there is a swell that happens leading up to the hit, like this.
Have them too.
So adding in reverse cymbals or using other reversed elements can make those transitions so much better. Or on the opposite spectrum, it can also work to have complete silence for a moment right before it to really emphasize that hit. So for example, if you're in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, boom, and then you like suck it in on beat 4 and then you hit hard on beat 1. Again, those things need to work together, that transition with a strong landing point. If those two things aren't working together, it's just not gonna work. This whole concept came from what I've talked about in my course Producer Accelerator. And if you think this video is helpful, let me tell you that my course is jam-packed with insane value and lessons that will radically help you level up your own productions. We cover everything from the basics to vocal production, to drum production, to mixing, and even several session breakdowns. Actually, both of these songs are session breakdowns, and an entire 3-hour mix session unfiltered of that mashup that I showed you in this example. Not only that, but we have a private community where you can get feedback, ask questions, and be in a community of like-minded individuals. So if you're stuck or wanting to experience a bigger transformation as a producer, to start making the tracks you wish you were capable of making, our students love it, and I've personally witnessed as hundreds of our members have radically improved their production quality. I've got a link right here where you can join, or it's in the description. See you soon.